Hi, everybody. It's Joe Cioffi here, and just about right on the dot at midnight. So before we take a look at what I did with my colleague tonight with meteorologist Joe Rao, let's take a look at what's going on at the moment. 918 millibars is the last measure of the pressure here. It came up a little bit to about 920 or so. Now it's dropped again another 2 millibars, and you can see the eye of Irma is heading steadily west-northwest. Hardly a wobble, just kind of moving in a straight line here. It's getting that, trying to get that circular look again as it pulls away from Puerto Rico. Now some of the circulation is going to get slightly distorted, perhaps by the Dominican Republic, but the eye and the core of the hurricane are going to pass well north of the Dominican Republic and head right for the Bahamas, where we have warnings up. And also just want to show you on the Atlantic satellite that for the first time since 2010, we have 3 hurricanes at the same time. We have Irma in the middle. We've got Hurricane Jose that's strengthening as well. Top winds are 85 miles an hour. And we have Hurricane Katia, which formed late this afternoon in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. Jose is no threat to land at the moment. Katia is pinned in the southwest Gulf. It's in wide open waters, so it might strengthen some more. But you've got that trough to the north here, so that's going to keep it pinned down in the southwest Gulf. And I don't think it's going to be any threat to anywhere in the United States, although it will be a threat to Mexico, the Mexican coast here, the south coast. It's forecast to eventually move south and southwest, but we're really just spending all our time on Irma, which makes complete sense. And we'll take a look real fast. I want to see if we have the these were the earlier forecast tracks. I'm going to see if I can update these out. I may not be able to. Doesn't appear that I can. And here's that recon run with 16, 17, and then 20 on the recon. But they measured 918. They came out on the advisory with 918. So I'm not sure why they had it 2 millibars lower off the last fix that was indicated. So we'll get this started, and I'll chat with you in the meantime. So just hang on here. Here we go. I think you'll. Okay, I'm having some problems again. This must be my day for problems. I'm not sure why. It should be here somewhere. I have no idea what's wrong. Oh boy. I'm sorry, folks. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm having mega issues here with regards to this. And for some reason, I can't open the file. So let me just try this again. Please bear with me. I appreciate your patience. So just hang in there. Third time was the charm. Hang on, it's coming. Got to turn the mic on first, which I just did. All right, we're on. Hi, everybody. It's Joe Cioffi with
turn the mic
Joe
on
Rao.
first,
Hi, everybody.
which I just did. All right,
now I got to turn the mic off. Okay, we are here this evening, of course, with everything that's going on with respect to Irma, and just give me half a second. I'm going to at least I'm going to put up the post, so this way we can see the comments going by and maybe address some of them. So just give me 1 second here, and we'll get this underway. But in the meantime, of course, we are just kind of marveling at what's going on with Hurricane Irma. From a meteorological standpoint, it's really like watching history being made.
I think Irma's been living a charmed life. I can remember back to, for example, 1979, there was Hurricane David and Hurricane Frederick, and both of those, I believe, became entrenched for a short time in the mountains of the Dominican Republic and Cuba. And when that happens, the storm gets some of its wind knocked out of it.
Right.
And in fact, the mountains almost shred part of the circulation. But this has not happened with Irma. Irma has maintained a situation where her feet have always been wet out over the waters, the open waters, and they have been very warm waters, well into the 80s Fahrenheit. And so long as Irma remains out over the water, that's like gasoline for hurricanes, she will maintain the extreme strength that she has shown. Category 5, 180, 185 mile per hour winds, sustained winds, and some gusts even in excess of 200 miles an hour.
Well, one of the remarkable things about this, and this is a record, that Irma has held Category 5 status now for well over 36 hours, which is longer than any other storm ever in the Atlantic Basin, which is, it's incredible, and it doesn't show any signs of it letting go. In fact, the last reconnaissance report showed the pressure actually falling. I'm going to shut those lights, but just give me 1 second here.
All right. Yeah, those lights can be a little. Take your advantage. Yeah, there they go.
Otherwise,
now,
as I was saying with right, as I was saying with regards to Irma being a Category 5 now for 36 hours and counting, that's longer than any storm has ever been in the Atlantic Basin. It also achieved the lowest pressure ever recorded by a storm in the Atlantic Ocean. So we're taking out the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. There have been lower pressures, but in the actual Atlantic Ocean itself, this is the lowest pressure.
Let me just, I don't mean to cut you off. I want to address this one thing. Of the models that we look at, the mid and long-range models, the GFS, for example, and the European model, the Canadian model, a lot of these, in fact, all of these models have been very poor in initializing or at least accounting for the extreme low pressure that Irma has shown. Now, in some cases, for example, the Canadian model, it's been as much as 60 or 70 millibars off, much too high. The GFS model has been closest to the point, but even there, they've been on the high side by about 5 or 7 millibars. I only bring this up because if you take a look at what the track that Irma has in the days to come, when it is located just this side of, let's say, Southeast Florida, Sunday morning, they are indicating a barometric pressure of something like 895 millibars. Now, that would place it, if that were actually verified, that would be within 3 millibars of the all-time record for any hurricane in the Atlantic Basin, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico. That, of course, was the Labor Day hurricane of 1935. And if the GFS is underplaying still the strength of this storm, this could be a record breaker, and that unfortunately also means that Irma, as she just about is ready to make landfall in South Florida, will still be a Category 5 storm.
Let's address really fast the question that people are throwing up with respect to our area, New Jersey, Long Island, Hudson Valley, New York City, and so on. The risk here is for a direct hit is almost zero at this point, based on what we're seeing. Okay, there's the possibility that we could be dealing with remnants of Hugo are ultimately going to depend on wrong storm. Ultimately, the track of Irma once it goes inland, because if it goes west of the Appalachians, we're going to see. If it goes west of the Appalachians, we're going to see most of the rain go west of the Appalachians, and we probably won't see very much. If it were to go east of the Appalachians, we'll may have a different story with regards to rain. But I still don't see this as being any big problem either way.
Yeah, you did mention Hugo, and if I recall correctly, Hugo hit around the Charleston, South Carolina area, and then worked its way almost due north, and it came through western or central sections of Pennsylvania, but it was still fairly well intact. And in the tri-state New York metropolitan area, we did see some strong gusty winds and some showery, heavy downpours from Hugo. However, this particular track that we're watching now for Irma takes it more on a northwest trajectory, more toward the Ohio Valley.
It's a Kentucky practice.
Kentucky, so much further away from us. So I don't think we're going to have to worry too much about wind. And I think you agree that we may see some showers or some rain here on Wednesday.
Right.
But I mean,
you wouldn't know it if it would probably be if you didn't know there was a tropical system involved. You wouldn't know the difference.
We had a rainy Saturday. Why? Because we had the remnants of Harvey. Harvey, of course, devastated Texas, but it just brought a regular rainy day to us. Pretty much that's what looks like will be the story next week on Wednesday. We'll get some rain and some cloud cover, but that's all about what the remnants of the will probably provide.
All right, so let's take a look at a couple of things right now. First of all, I happened to have been up last night at about 2 a.m. I actually waited because I saw this was possible, but I grabbed a snapshot of the eye of Hurricane Irma as it moved over the island of Barbuda. And if you look closely, the purple outline marking here, that is the island of Barbuda actually sitting inside the eye of this buzzsaw that went through. And it was a buzzsaw. That's exactly what it looks like on the satellite. When you look at these Category 5 hurricanes, when you ask people that went through Hurricane Andrew, that's the word that comes up. It was like a buzzsaw.
Right.
And it went from there over St. Martin, and also over the Virgin Islands, taking a direct hit. And now on the current satellite loop, which I can bring up, we'll see that it wound up, it is now north, the eye is actually north of Puerto Rico. The Weather Service is, and a lot of the websites, the Weather Service websites, by the way, are extremely busy and hard to get into, which has made it problematic trying to load some of these loops up. But you can see here, as the frames come in, the eye is passing north of Puerto Rico, but they're getting lashed with some, pretty hefty winds right along the north coast and some very heavy rains.
I like how you transition now. The first half of this loop is mostly visible satellite, but of course the sun is going down now, so then you transition over to infrared, and you get a nice view in the infrared of the snow.
And the eye is just as circular and as clear. The pressure this afternoon actually started dropping again, which certainly means that they're probably going to find it every bit as strong as it was earlier. Maybe even they might find some winds a little bit stronger.
It's like I said at the onset of our conversation, she is living, Irma is a charmed life, because right immediate to the west is Hispaniola, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and some of those mountains on that island are on excess of 9,000 and 10,000 feet. So if you have the circulation of a storm like Irma interact with those mountains, it's going to get shredded a little bit. Certainly the pressure will go up, the wind field will weaken some, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. It looks like the eye is going to stay north of the island.
And certainly most of the core of the hurricane will probably stay north of the Dominican Republic. So it looks like the next stop is going to be the Bahamas, where we have hurricane warnings up. Let's take a look at where we are with respect to the forecasts. I have the late afternoon hurricane model track guidance, which up until now has worked very, very well with this. I think it's worked better than the global models have shown it. These models have been fairly consistent, and if you kind of looked at this in terms of just seeing where most of the models are clustered, that seems to be where the track is. Right. And if you look at the afternoon model plots, two of them are offshore Florida, where the eye would clear the immediate coast. But the vast majority of them bring it just inland of the coast in southeast Florida, and then north or maybe slightly east of due north until it moves out somewhere near or just north of Daytona Beach. That to me, that's kind of where I'm at with this. Right. We're talking about a handful of miles here making a huge difference. So, I'm not. I don't think I'm good enough to kind of pinpoint this down to 30 miles. And with the eye being 30 to 40 miles wide, if you have the basic center just offshore by 20 or 30 miles, that means 10 miles of the eye wall is going to penetrate inland.
Sure.
I don't know that there's any forecaster that can be that good. So it's really a question of where where we're going to see it when it's actually happening. I mean, I think the spreads keep narrowing and narrowing, so it's hard to imagine that we're going to be outside the range that's being indicated. And the other thing is, once it emerges back over water, it goes back in and probably is at least a Category 3 hurricane, or maybe even a little bit stronger, into coastal Georgia or South Carolina.
Right. And well, as I mentioned a little while ago, if the GFS is correct, and I'm only doing this from the standpoint of barometric pressure as one guideline. The Saffir-Simpson scale has several scales for barometric pressure and for wind. From a barometric pressure point of view, it could still be every bit of a 5 or a very strong 4. But regardless of whether it's a 4 or 5, we're still talking about a major hurricane continuing in strength and its movement relative to Florida and Georgia and South Carolina. So it's going to be a very, very dangerous situation. But also, we're talking, Joe, about Florida overall. A lot of people I know live from the New York area live down in Miami. Some people call Miami the 6th borough. But others may live in western sections of Florida, Fort Myers, for example, and Venice Beach. They are going to be further away from the storm center. So not to say that they're going to escape, but they will probably have somewhat less in terms of wind intensity and in terms of rainfall. And if you live in that part of Florida in the Panhandle, especially to the west of Pensacola, for example, you may, see some gusty breezes and maybe a few showers, but for the most part, in that section of Florida, you may not entirely, but almost completely escape. It's kind of like what we say sometimes during blizzards and heavy snowstorms here in the tri-state area. The folks who live nearest to the coast get clobbered, and meanwhile the folks who live, let's say, up in Orange and Ulster County, further away from the storm track, get only a few flurries. It may be, use that analogy for this hurricane. The folks who live further to the north and to the west, away from the coast in Florida, will see the least amount of activity from Irma, and the folks who live right along the east coast of Florida, you're going to be seeing the worst of it.
Just looking at some reconnaissance. This is there's a new reconnaissance flight that's in here, and courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com. By all means, a great website, but if you don't have to be on it, don't. It's been so busy. We're having a tough time getting into it, and so are a lot of others. Hey, Levi, if you're listening to this, I hope it wasn't me that drove the traffic to your site and is crashing your server. But the plane that's in there now, and we have a very tight shot here. The plane is actually flying toward the eye at this point. So when we look at the scale,
better than us,
right? And yes, and this is 65 west, and this is 18 north. So I'm thinking that this is Puerto Rico, the eastern part of Puerto Rico. So he's the plane. You can see it's pointed up northwestward, so he's flying up there, and at flight level at this point, just offshore, he's got 55 to 60 knots being reported, and the orange all here is every bit of 50 to 55. So the center is somewhere up here, so he's coming in from the southeast. So it won't be too long before he'll probably get some observations from in the center, and we'll be able to see just exactly what we're dealing with here in terms of pressure, if it's just maintained its strength, or if it's gotten maybe nudged up the winds a little bit, if that's even possible. Well, you know what? Look, there is a top limit. There's something like this. There is a top limit. It can only get the pressure can only get so low, but it is certainly.
I wish I had $1 for every person who was asked, both Joe and myself, over the last couple of days, why isn't there a Category 6 for a storm like this?
Yeah, I'm just glad we kind of let's avoid that subject.
Category 5 is
catastrophic.
I mean, what more do you want than that?
Cataclysmic, apocalyptic, doomsday, smog. Okay, here we go. I'm going to put the models up. We're going to take a look at what the models did this afternoon, and I'm going to get into a nice tight region here so that we can see everything up close. We'll use the Atlantic region, and I will use the 10-meter wind, which works. Okay, so you can see it here. This is the new afternoon run of the GFS. And as we take it along, look after looking at it, we seem to be getting it like we get in the wintertime with these snowstorms, where one run is a little further to the north and one run is a little bit further to the south. We seem to be getting runs that are vacillating back and forth. And by the way, on this shot here that you see, which is for Thursday evening, there are 3 hurricanes in it. We've got Katia in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. We have Irma here, north of the Dominican Republic. Virtually all of the circulation seems to be out over water. And Jose, which is actually approaching the northern Leeward Islands again. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But you know what, one storm at a time. And just to get it out of the way, Katia is going to probably sit in the southwest Gulf and eventually go into Mexico, moving to the south or southwest. So it's not a factor in the weather in the United States or in Texas or in Louisiana. It's not going to the northern Gulf, so we can put that off the table. Okay, so here we go with Irma. Moves on a course to the west-northwest until we get to about 2 a.m. Sunday, and then we start to see a jog to the north. Now, in this position that we have here, it's sitting a handful of miles on this run. It's sitting a handful of miles off the Florida coast. On the prior run, it was sitting a handful of miles just inland of the Florida coast. So, you know, this is really kind of a tough call in terms of the forecast. I don't think it's a tough call if you have to make a decision, if you know, in that area. You know, it's too close for me to deal with the margin of error. I would rather be safe than sorry.
Right. And we're still 4 days away anyway for them, and things may change a little bit, but if you're hoping for the storm to suddenly take a trek out to sea,
that seems to be off the table.
That ain't happening. I don't think. Yeah,
that seems to be off the table with regards. You know, what was interesting with this to me was when I looked at the upper flow, and because we have a very intense feature, we got to go way up in the atmosphere. Normally we go up to about 18,000 feet, but when you have a very intense storm like this, the steering currents, you know, you have to go up higher and higher in order to see the steering mechanisms. In a weaker hurricane or tropical storm, it's the bottom part of the atmosphere that's going to drive it along.
Right.
But a system like this is so vertical, it just goes all the way up, that you got to look higher. And you know, one of the things that I noticed with this, as we look up at above 25,000 feet, even though there's a trough here in the east where the winds along the Carolinas and down even into northern Florida are from the southwest, and would argue that, okay, that should take it out to sea, but right here to the east-northeast of Irma, there's a big upper high, and you see how the lines here are drawn. They push back westward, right, kind of cradling it, right, keeping it away from that southwest flow, and that's what's keeping this. This would be an out-to-sea storm if it wasn't for the fact of that upper high.
It's locked in almost like a channel, if you will, going straight up. It looks like going straight up over. Straight north along longitude 80 degrees west.
Right. And after Florida, there's going to be likely a second landfall on the Georgia-South Carolina coast. And when we look at the upper flow, what happens is this trough here in the Ohio Valley that drops southward into the north-central Gulf of Mexico. And Irma responds to that by moving north-northeast, then north, and then north-northwest. And that is the reason why it's not coming up here, right, because this trough is pulling it back.
Right.
Now, why don't we show everybody this is the GFS. So let me just put back that the 10-meter wind. Okay, and you know, let's look at the European. Now, I kind of been using this view, Joe, that the if the GFS is the furthest east of the global models, the European has been the furthest west of the global models, and the European today had a bit of a slightly different picture, where it goes into over the Florida Keys, and so it makes the turn maybe 60 miles or so further west than the GFS does, and takes it inland over the Florida Keys, and then back out northeast up off the east coast of Florida. So that, from the standpoint of impact for eastern Florida, would be completely, would be much different from what the GFS would do.
Right. Right. A lot of people said last year. I know one of my best friends told me last year. Told me today, relative to last year, about Matthew, that they said it was going to be the end of Florida with Matthew, and then Matthew suddenly took a unexpected jog, and it ended up not being so bad. And there are some people today, with the approach of Irma, saying, well, they said this about Matthew, and the same thing, and we don't have to worry. But you know what? You can't take, no two storms are alike. And if you play down this, and you think you're gonna stay in your house and you're not gonna go anywhere, and you think everything's gonna be fine, you may be in for a very, very sad
right, for a third outcome.
Yeah.
I mean, a 30 to 40 mile difference here. The model spread is well over 100 miles. So, where that final track lies is going to make a huge difference in terms of what happens. Matthew bounced off the coast. It never really penetrated the coast completely. So, if Irma stays east, if the core of the hurricane, if the eye stays just offshore, you might have an outcome similar to Matthew, but I would suspect that it would be a bit worse because of the strength of this storm. Matthew was a Category 4, but it wasn't, at the top of the scale Category 4, and this one has got 185 mile an hour winds, and we've seen, by the way, those strong winds on both sides. So if you've got a 100 mile an hour plus wind on the west side, is going to have the impact the 100 mile an hour wind has on the east side. But we are seeing hurricane force winds going in a number of miles, a sizable number of miles to the west of the center. So track is going to be key.
And the memory too of two monster storms of the past for the folks who live in and around the Homestead, Florida area, they well remember 1992 with Hurricane Andrew. And if indeed the storm does take a track just offshore and recurves back inland near Charleston, well, that brings up bad memories of Hurricane Hugo in the late 80s. So this is one that we're certainly going to be watching almost by the minute by the time we get to the upcoming weekend.
Oh yeah, and the European, by the way, does the same thing that the GFS does, which is takes it out just off the Florida coast and then hooks it back northwestward with a landfall somewhere on the near the Georgia-South Carolina border, which would kind of make sense here. Let me.
It may not be necessarily Charleston. It may be more like Savannah.
It could very well be. I just we'll punch up the wide satellite loop. Because you'll be able to see all three hurricanes at the same time. So here we have on the farthest east is Jose with 75 mile an hour winds. And this is the first time, by the way, I believe since 2010 that we've had three hurricanes on the map at the same time.
Yeah.
Irma in between and Katia in the Southwest Gulf. And with respect to the Katia in the Southwest Gulf, if you look at the way the clouds are moving in the Northwest Gulf, they're going from north to south. Okay, so that's telling you that the hurricane is not going to be able to push up in that direction.
Right.
Okay. When you look north and west of Irma, the clouds are, especially from North Florida, you can see the bottom of that trough that would take it out to sea, with those clouds moving southwest to northeast. And it's kind of hard to believe that it's not going to get caught by that. It's not that, it's still far away from it. But right in between is that very, very strong yet very, very narrow ridge that's acting like a wall and keeping it from getting caught in that trough.
Almost like an arm that's right over the top of Irma that's saying, "Here, girl, you're not going this way."
Right. So we still have a few more days. There are, just to give you folks, just to see the new, the National Hurricane Center's National Hurricane Center's track. It kind of goes in between the European and the GFS, and is clustered where we showed you those track models. The red areas are all under hurricane warning. Oh, and by the way, I had my friend Scott Garland just messaged me and said that he has a friend of his in St. Thomas who went through the storm and sent him a communication and said that the island is decimated.
Yeah.
just decimated. The down near the lower areas, the areas closer to sea level, they're all under at least 4 feet of water.
Now, have we heard from Barbuda?
I think there are scattered reports starting to come out from Barbuda, but for most of today, there were no reports at all. You can see the warnings extend for the northern coast of the Dominican Republic. We've got warnings up for the Southeast and Central Bahamas, a watch for the Western Bahamas, and for the North Shore of Cuba, tropical storm warnings as you go toward the southeast part of Cuba. And for the United States at the moment, there are no hurricane watches. But tomorrow morning, I'm suspecting that the Hurricane Center is probably going to put the hurricane watch up for the Florida coast.
Well, I can tell you that the local officials in Florida, especially along the East Coast, I have a friend who lives in Boynton Beach on the East Coast of Florida, and he says that they've already been prepping people for several days now. So even without their hurricane watch, they're aware, they know, and it's just going to be a matter of when the watch goes up tomorrow, probably goes up tomorrow, it's just going to be almost like an afterthought.
I just pulled up. We have a new recon shot here that was taken just about 9 minutes ago. The plane is now, you can see it here, and this is the eye. So this is the satellite picture, the white, all the clouds. So the plane is now flying into the eye. And if we look at the wind barbs, at least from the southeast, he just flew out of. Now he's on the south side, which is the weaker side, and we don't know what the barbs are yet for where that plane icon is. But just before that, we're in 96 to 113, 83 to 96, 96 to 113. So we'll probably have to wait another 10 or 15 minutes or so to get the winds just outside the eye wall and the pressure. But judging from this, I have a sneaking suspicion they're not going to find anything weaker.
No. It's just been incredible, and again, it looks like it's going to be pretty much maintaining its strength, or we're very close to doing that, for the next several days to come, which is amazing to say, considering it's been a Category 5 for 36 hours. You pointed out an all-time record, and the fact that we're talking about the possibility that it may stay that way, not just for another few hours more, but for another few more days, is just unbelievable.
Zach Glenn just posted, he said, just Googled Barbuda damage. Report says that 90% of the structures in Barbuda have been destroyed.
Wow.
It just updated again. Peter Vickers is letting me know that it just updated again. So let's see what we got. Yep. All right. So he's flying around the eye wall, and we've got this area right in here of 137 knots or higher. Thanks, Peter, for letting us know. So he's spinning around the eye wall, and what I love about these, by the way, is that when each pass comes, they circle around the eye wall, so you will get 3 observations. To actually visibly see this. We always known that.
Right.
There's a shot, by the way, of CNN at the moment showing the damage. I mean, oh my!
Antigua and Barbuda.
It's like everything is just leveled.
Yeah.
Amazing. We'll get 3 pressure readings over the. Might help if I turn the mic on. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is what happens after a long day, folks. I apologize. I had issues with the video earlier today, and that's why I stopped it about a quarter of the way through. And as a result, I got it all fixed, and now I ran it. So why don't we just now look at the new GFS before I get myself deeper into trouble. So we'll let it load here, and let's, I'll pull it up. We'll get a tighter region. And we'll go to the beginning. And we have to be a little patient with the load here because servers are overloaded at Tropical Tidbits. But it looks to me like the GFS was about the same. Now, it takes the hurricane, it keeps it off the north coast of Cuba. And by the way, it keeps it as a Category 5. It brings the pressure down to under 900 millibars. And the actual eye stays just offshore the Florida coast, close to Miami. The eye wall might be touching the coast at this point, the western part of the eye wall. If we put I'll put the wind, the 10-meter wind rather than the precip. And you can see here in the reds, 40 knots, and in the purple is all 52 knots or higher, and in the black, which is just touching the coast, that's off the charts. So that's how tight it is. And that's why it's so important here that, a 20 or 30 mile shift to the west is going to be a huge problem if that eye wall were to come ashore. But the way I have been looking at this through the last several days is that I think the GFS is the furthest east of all the models, and the European is the furthest west, and that the track will be somewhere in between, and that it would make a landfall somewhere in southeastern Florida. But then it does come back out, and then the GFS makes that second landfall, and it's a little further to the northeast on this one. It's at Charleston, right near Charleston, South Carolina, or perhaps just a shade east of Charleston. You can see the profile of the wind. So the yellows would be gales up into the interior, at least from the initial landfall because of the hurricane being so intense. But the winds actually get spent out fairly quickly, although even at Tuesday morning when it's sitting in central North Carolina, assuming this track is right, there's still a belt of 40 knot plus winds here. So this is still a tropical storm at this point. And then it takes it toward the west part of the Appalachians and tries to hook it around. And of course, by this time, as we go through later in the day, Tuesday, the winds decrease rapidly once that low center gets into the mountains. And you see how the isobars just kind of spread out. So the gradient disappears. And by the way, Jose is the system that's to the southeast, well east of Florida here, as that gets pushed out to the east. And it looks like it might do some kind of a loop. I'm not, I haven't really looked. Now, with respect to impacts for inland areas, since some of you have asked about that. So here's the rainfall amounts. And you notice that the rain from the hurricane in the yellows are generally 10 inches or more. And that really gets confined to a very small area near the coast northeast of the center. And then you have heavy rains, but the amounts lessen a bit as you go up into Virginia. And even back through the mountains here, the GFS is not really showing a whole lot of rain, generally on the order of 2 or 3 inches, and even in some cases less. So we'll have to wait and see how, where the landfall is, because it all depends on how it interacts with the topography in terms of who gets the heaviest rainfall. So I hope that helps. And then, that looks like I have the maximum amount here. Now, with regards to overall impact, also notice that the rain area just kind of, there's some rain that moves up through the mid-Atlantic states and into the northeast. You get some heavy rains here into Virginia for a little while, but that slowly begins to disappear, and then gradually the low just pulls away to the northeast as we get into later Wednesday and Thursday. This is not a situation, sometimes when you have these tropical systems come in, if there's something in the upper atmosphere that's coming down to pick it up, and it winds up energizing it the way it would energize a non-tropical low, there doesn't appear to be that in this particular instance. Now, when we look at the upper air, and I'll just back away. So here's that trough. You see the trough coming off the east coast. That doesn't really have much impact, but it starts to pull to the north in response to troughing that drops down into the central Gulf states, and it gets hooked around into that upper air trough and then swings north and northwestward. The problem with remnant tropical storms, when they move inland to impact the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, they really have to be moving in the direction of the north-northeast, just inland of the coast, in order for you to have at least several hours or more of tropical storm conditions. And this just does not appear to be the case, because the northern part of the jet stream is way to the north of the Canadian border. So this thing is just kind of left in its own little world to do what it has to do. And then eventually it gets kicked out by another system that comes down in the northern jet and heads over into New England. So, the big question for me at this point is, where is this, is the landfall in Florida? And if it is, where? Let's look at the NAM model, because I haven't really paid too much attention to the NAM model with this. But I just want to point out with the NAM, and let's look at the surface. I'll put the 10-meter wind. Okay, so we'll back it up a little bit. This is the NAM's position at Saturday evening, 8 o'clock. And if we go back, I'm going to go back one model run, and you'll notice that the hurricane is actually south and west of its prior run. The prior run has it out here at 84 hours. The new run has it at least a degree further west. So it seems like the NAM is coming into what the GFS and the European had earlier today, where the GFS tonight did a repeat of the day run, skimming it just off the Florida coast, and the European takes it further west over the Keys before it moves inland. So that's the track you don't want in Florida. You don't want the European to be correct here, because that track would bring the core of the hurricane right over South Florida, and then you would get the buzzsaw effect. James CIP, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you for hitting the super chat. That gets me. Well, I think we got the coffee maker fixed, so we'll at least it'll get me be able to buy some coffee for it. Thank you. So again, the very critical question now is that we are going to have a category, certainly Cyan, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We are going to have a category 4 or a category 5 hurricane. The GFS has it reaching pressures under 900 millibars. And, that model has been pretty good with the intensity of all the global models that we look at. The GFS has really handled the intensity of this a lot better. It hasn't been perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They've all been off, but the GFS has had it better. And maybe it is telling us something, that when it gets into the Western Bahamas, that it's going to have another round of rapid deepening. So this is going to be very interesting to see it play out. I would expect hurricane watches to go up for the Florida coast in the morning. They might wait a little longer to put them up further north, but I'm sure they're going to eventually put them up, perhaps not until Friday, or because of the time. It's going to take an extra day for it to get up there. PR Grudge, thank you so much. Thank you for hitting the super chat. You guys are great. I really appreciate it. We're ultimately, are we going to have a major hurricane landfall twice? Are we going to have it as a category 3 when it's certainly going to be, every bit of a 4 or 5 when it gets to Florida. Hopefully it'll weaken some. I don't see anything that suggests that it would, but it might. This storm has done, weird things in terms of getting the intensity the way it is. There's some argument about what kind of a storm are we going to see when it gets to the Carolina coast. Well, if it doesn't make landfall in Florida, that I think increases the chance that it could be a Cat 3 or a Cat 4 when it reaches South Carolina. Again, let's hope that that's not the case. The Hurricane Center, because it has more of an inland track, has it at more of a Category 2. coming into South Carolina. You know what? I think those are arguments for when we get there. It's we really do have to see what happens now as it moves through the Bahamas. I'm going to see if there's another if they sent another recon flight in yet. I'll give you 1 second here. If they did, I will pull it up for you. We have missions 15. No, the last mission is what I had up on the screen is the very last mission that went on through. So I think at this point we'll leave it be, and we'll wait till tomorrow. I'm going to try and get a live stream done before I leave for work tomorrow around noontime or a little bit before. I've got something I got to do in the morning, so it might tie up my time a little bit. But if I can't do a long live stream, I'll try and do maybe a short live one where we'll just go through the maps and look at the new models as they're coming out. Tonight's European run, I'm sure, will be watched very, very carefully and very closely for any indication of whether it's coming, if it comes a little bit to the east, or is it going to hold firm on a track slightly to the west. And again, remember, we're talking here about a handful of miles. 50, 60 miles here is huge, especially for Southeast Florida. That 50 to 60 mile difference means the difference between being on the edge of the eye wall or inside the eye wall. And the outcome in terms of what can result from that difference is tremendous. All right. So we're going to watch to see what that, about that. The hurricane track models tonight. Let me just pull those up one more time. See if I got the new ones. And okay, this is 18Z. So, but I know the new ones are there. So just give me 1 second, and I'll get them for you. That'll just take me a moment. By the way, the Canadian model is very similar to the GFS. It might be just a little bit to the left of the GFS, but the tracks are very similar. It's just a handful of miles that we see the difference. Okay, so here's the global. I have the global hurricane models from this for 0Z, so I'll put them up here for you. Here we go. And here you have it. Now they've shifted a little bit to the east. You have looks like 4 of them bring it onshore on the Florida coast, and these are the 2 that are the furthest west. But these 2 that are furthest west also bring it right onto Cuba, and you have 2 of these models take it just inland of the coast near Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and then they come out near Daytona Beach. The others are just barely offshore, and then they all go in, virtually all of them except for 1, take them into South Carolina. I have liked the way the hurricane track model guidance has worked with Irma, as opposed to the global models. I think the global models they've had issues with regards to pressure. And with regards to track as well. The GFS has been the furthest east through all of this from where it is in Florida, and it also was the furthest north. It had to make adjustments. It was too far north, and it made adjustments further south as we got closer in time. So it may still be too far to the east. The European has been better, showing the movement over the leewards. Which it did get correct, and it went a little further north today, where it just missed going over the north coast of Cuba, and it took it to the Keys before it makes the turn. So I think that's the west outlier. The GFS is the east outlier, and all the other models seem to be coming in right in between. I honestly think that that's where the track is going to be, and that gap continues to shrink as we go, as every model run comes out and we get closer and closer to the arrival of Irma. that difference is shrinking. So, hopefully we'll know by 36 hours before landfall whether that eye is going to be on the coast or just right along it, or maybe a number of miles just off the coast. So we'll see, folks. A new model cycle will be starting soon. Before you know it, the mid-cycle run starts at 5:30 in the morning. So as soon as you get done with one run, everybody starts thinking about the next one. So thank you all very much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed Joe Rao and I doing this together. Again, I apologize for the technical glitch earlier tonight, but now that I figured out how to do it, we'll fix it, and I'll get him to sit closer to the computer so that he can catch the microphone and that his audio will be a bit better. So I'm going to go to sleep. Thanks for those of you who have hit the super chat. I really appreciate it. I'll just put. Thanks for those of you who hit the super chat. I really, really appreciate it very much. It's very thoughtful of you. And a cigar or two works for me. That's my one thing that I enjoy. I enjoy having a cigar and relaxing. And thank you. Okay, so have a great evening, folks. We will see you tomorrow, and let's hope that it winds up being further east. We really don't want a Category 5 hurricane to be hitting anywhere. Okay, I know from a meteorological standpoint these things are very exciting, but the damage that was done in Barbuda, in St. Martin, Antigua, Anguilla, and a number of other islands there in the Leewards was, jaw-dropping. And also in the Virgin Islands and St. Thomas, you just don't want stuff like that to happen. And in lieu of what just happened in Texas, do we really need to have, another Category 3 hurricane or higher rip through a part of the United States? Okay, have a great evening, folks. Good nights. Everybody sleep well, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.